The Regional Archives Bureau operates out of a converted textile factory on the outskirts of what used to be an industrial district. 3 floors of filing cabinets, storage boxes, and climate-controlled rooms containing decades of administrative records, personnel files, and operational documentation from the transition period. Most of it is mundane. Budget reports, staffing rosters, maintenance schedules. The ordinary bureaucratic detritus of institutions that no longer exist in their original form, preserved because no one has explicitly authorized their destruction. We were hired as part of a digitization initiative. The goal was straightforward: convert physical records to digital format, create searchable databases, ensure compliance with data retention policies. 6 of us worked in rotation, scanning documents, entering metadata, flagging items that required translation or additional context. The work was tedious but stable. We maintained strict protocols. Documents were logged, scanned, indexed, and returned to their original containers. Nothing was to be removed from the facility. Nothing was to be discussed outside of official channels. The logs appeared during our processing of Box 847J, part of a collection transferred from a regional administrative center that had been consolidated in the late 1990s. The box was labeled Miscellaneous Technical Documentation, 1983-1991. Most of the contents matched the description: equipment manuals, calibration records, supply inventories. Standard material from various municipal and industrial facilities that had submitted their archives during the reorganization. The logs were near the bottom of the box, bound in a deteriorating brown folder with no external markings. Approximately 200 pages of entries, typed on what appeared to be standard administrative forms. The paper quality suggested they were contemporary with the other materials. The typewriter font matched dozens of other documents we had processed. Nothing visually distinguished them from thousands of other routine records we had handled. The first entry was dated March 3, 1983. The header read, Operational Log, Station 12, Shift A. No location, no organizational identifier, no signature, just the date, the shift designation, and a series of routine notations. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, overcast, temperature, forward to cell, wind negligible. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 87% capacity. CO645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 7:30. Routine maintenance on ventilation system. Filter replacement scheduled for next week. Air quality readings within acceptable parameters. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. The entries continued in this manner for several pages. Shift reports detailing equipment checks, weather observations, routine maintenance tasks. The language was clinical, impersonal, the kind of documentation produced by technicians who had written similar reports hundreds of times. Nothing in the content suggested anything unusual about Station 12 or its operations. We initially assumed these were logs from a weather monitoring station or radio transmission facility. Several such installations had operated in the region during the period in question, particularly in more remote areas where meteorological data was collected for agricultural and infrastructure planning purposes. The references to sensors, antennas, and monitoring protocols aligned with such facilities. The first indication that something was unusual came when we attempted to cross-reference Station 12 with our database of known facilities. Standard procedure required us to identify the origin of each document. linking it to specific locations and organizational structures. This allowed for proper historical context and ensured accurate metadata tagging. Station 12 did not appear in any registry. We searched through facility listings from the relevant administrative districts. We checked municipal records, technical service directories, and infrastructure documentation from the 1980s. We examined maps showing the locations of monitoring stations, radio installations, and research facilities. Nothing matched. One of our colleagues suggested it might have been a temporary installation, something operational for a limited period and never formally registered. This occasionally happened with auxiliary facilities set up for specific projects or seasonal monitoring purposes. But even temporary installations typically left some paper trail. Funding requests, equipment allocations, personnel assignments, something. We found nothing. The logs themselves provided few geographical clues. Weather observations were vague. Temperature and wind conditions could describe dozens of locations across the region. There were no references to nearby towns, roads, or landmarks. The few maintenance notes that mentioned external features used generic terms: northern perimeter, eastern sector, access road. Nothing specific enough to determine location. We continued scanning the logs, entering each entry into our database with a notation that the facility's location and organizational affiliation remained unidentified. This was not unprecedented. Archives often contained orphaned documents whose origins were unclear. They were preserved, cataloged, and flagged for future research. The entries remained routine for the first several months. March through July 1983 consisted of nearly identical shift reports, equipment checks, weather observations, maintenance tasks. The monotony was actually remarkable. Most operational logs showed some variation: unusual weather events, equipment malfunctions, personnel changes. Station 12's logs read like they had been generated from a template, each day barely distinguishable from the previous one. The first anomaly appeared in an entry dated August 17, 1983. ZO 600, shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, clear, temperature 18 to C, wind moderate from southeast. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 91% capacity. 645, morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 0730, routine maintenance on ventilation system. Air quality readings within acceptable parameters. 0815, no anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. 1200, incident logged. See supplementary report. 1245, resumed normal operations. All systems nominal. No further anomalies detected. 1400, end of shift. Log transferred to shift B. There was no supplementary report. We checked the entire folder. Nothing was attached to this entry. No additional pages. No reference documents. Just the notation that an incident had been logged, followed by immediate resumption of normal operations. We made a note in our database. Missing documentation, possibly lost during archival transfer. It happened. Records were incomplete. Pages went missing. Entire files disappeared during decades of storage and reorganization. But it was the first break in the pattern, and patterns mattered in archival work. They helped establish authenticity, identify potential fabrications, and detect administrative irregularities. The logs continued. September and October 1983 were identical to the previous months. Routine entries, equipment checks, weather observations, no incidents, no maintenance issues, no personnel changes. The same typed format, The same impersonal language, the same clinical detachment. Then November 9th, 1983, 0600, shift commenced, all systems nominal. Weather conditions, snow, temperature, 8 excess, wind strong from north. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 84% capacity, 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 7:30. Routine maintenance delayed due to external conditions. Air quality readings within acceptable parameters. 081 Fundiv. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. 10:30. Sector 7 sensor malfunction. Recalibration attempted. Issue persists. 11:45. Sector 7 sensor offline. Maintenance scheduled for next shift. 1200. Incident logged. See supplementary report. 12:45. Resumed normal operations. Sector 7 sensor remains offline. All other systems nominal. 1400. End of I. Shift. Log transferred to Shift B, Sector 7 maintenance noted. Again, no supplementary report. Again, no details about the incident. And now a sensor malfunction that appeared was noted, and then never mentioned again in subsequent entries. We checked the following days. Sector 7 was not referenced. No maintenance report. No confirmation that the sensor was repaired or permanently decommissioned. One of our colleagues pointed out that the November 9th entry mentioned standard overnight activity detected by perimeter sensors. This was the first time the logs had indicated any activity at all. Previous entries consistently reported no activity overnight or no anomalies detected. What constituted standard overnight activity? The logs provided no clarification. We continued scanning. December 1983 through February 1984 returned to the completely routine pattern. No incidents, no sensor malfunctions, no activity detected. Just the same template entries repeated with minor variations in weather conditions. March 1984 introduced a new element. The entries began including references to scheduled transmissions. So 600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, partly cloudy, temperature 2 degrees, wind light from west. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 89% capacity. ZO 645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 074 East. Equipment prepared. 750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. Transmissions became a regular feature, usually once per shift, sometimes twice. Always noted as scheduled. Always described as completed successfully. Never any indication of content, recipient, or purpose. Just the acknowledgement that something was being transmitted and that this was part of normal operations. The logs provided no context. Radio facilities transmitted things. This was not unusual. Weather data, operational status reports, coordination with other installations. But the deliberate vagueness was striking. Most technical logs we processed included more specific details. Frequency ranges, call signs, receiving stations, something to indicate the nature and purpose of communications. Station 12's transmissions were described with a bare minimum of information. They happened. They were successful. Nothing more. By mid-1984, the logs had established a consistent pattern. Routine operations, weather observations, equipment checks, scheduled transmissions, occasional references to perimeter sensor activity, always described as standard or within normal parameters. No elaboration. Then June 23, 1984, 0600. Shift commenced. Angestellte systems nominal. Weather conditions, clear, temperature 16 degrees, wind negligible. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 90% capacity. 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. EO 920. Additional transmission requested. Equipment prepared. 0935. Unscheduled transmission completed. Duration 4 minutes. Non-standard protocols applied. 1015. No anomalies detected following transmission. All systems nominal. 1200. Incident logged. See supplementary report. 1245. Resumed normal operations. All systems nominal. 1400. End of shift. Log transferred to shift B. The unscheduled transmission. The non-standard protocols. The incident. And once again, no supplementary report. No explanation of why an additional transmission was requested, who requested it, or what made it necessary to deviate from standard protocols. We made extensive notes. The logs were becoming less routine and more cryptic. The gaps in information were not random, they appeared deliberate. Someone had written these entries knowing that certain details would not be included. The logs documented that things happened without explaining what those things were. This is a common feature in technical documentation from certain types of facilities. Security protocols often required that operational logs omit sensitive details, recording only that actions were taken without specifying their nature. But such logs usually indicated the classification level or referenced secure documentation stored separately. Station 12's logs contained no such indicators. They simply omitted information as if it were not relevant to the record. July through September 1984 continued with the established pattern, now including regular scheduled transmissions and occasional unscheduled ones. The incidents continued, noted approximately once every 2 weeks, always with a reference to a supplementary report that did not exist. In October 1984, the shift designations changed. Previous entries had consistently identified Shift A, Shift B, and Shift C, operating in 8-hour rotations. Starting October 1st, the logs only mentioned Shift A and Shift B, working 12-hour periods. No explanation was provided. No personnel changes were noted. The facility simply transitioned to a different operational schedule without comment. We discussed this among our team. Shift changes in facilities typically correlated with budget constraints, staffing shortages, or changes in operational requirements. But such transitions usually generated documentation, memoranda, policy updates, personnel reassignments. None of that appeared in the logs. Station 12 simply began operating on a different schedule as if it had always been that way. The logs for late 1984 began including a new type of notation. Every few days, an entry would include the phrase, "External monitoring confirmed." This appeared alongside the standard system checks, but was not elaborated upon. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions. Overcast. Temperature 7 exactus. Wind moderate from south. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 86% capacity. External monitoring confirmed. ZOX 45. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. What external monitoring referred to remained unclear. The sensors, the transmissions. Something else entirely? The phrase appeared randomly, sometimes multiple times per week, sometimes not for several weeks. No pattern was apparent. January 1985 introduced entries that struck us as particularly unusual. The logs began including time notations that did not align with the shift schedule. SO 600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions. Snow. Temperature 12 degrees Celsius. Wind strong from north. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 82% capacity. 645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 7:30. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 7:50. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. 0920. External monitoring confirmed. 1200. Incident logged. See supplementary report. 1245. Resumed normal operations. All systems nominal. 1400. End of shift. Log transferred to shift B. 1400. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, snow, temperature, 12 degrees Celsius, wind strong from north. Perimeter sensors show no activity during previous shift. Generator fuel at 82% capacity. 1445. Afternoon system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. The timestamp for the Shift B commencement matched the end of Shift A. This made sense for a handoff. But what followed was concerning. Several entries from this period showed Shift A ending at 1400 and Shift B beginning at 1400, but then included notations timestamped during hours when neither shift should have been operating. In one entry from February 1985, Shift A ended at 1400. Shift B began at 1400. But at 0230 the following morning, an entry appeared that read 0230. Unscheduled system check. All equipment functional. External monitoring confirmed. Routine operations continue. No shift designation. No explanation for who performed the check or why. Just the notation that something happened during hours when, according to the established schedule, the facility should have been minimally staffed or possibly unmanned overnight. We considered several explanations. Perhaps the shift schedules were not accurately reflected in the logs. Perhaps there was a third shift that had not been consistently documented. Perhaps emergency protocols required periodic overnight checks that were not part of the regular schedule. But none of these explanations fully accounted for the inconsistencies. The logs were supposed to be comprehensive records of operations. Even if overnight checks were minimal, they should have been documented with the same detail as daytime activities. Instead, these entries appeared sporadically, offered minimal information, and were not attributed to any particular shift or personnel. By mid-1985, the logs had become increasingly fragmented. Some days had complete entries for all shifts. Other days had entries only for Shift A or only for Shift B. A few days had no entries at all, with gaps of 24 to 48 hours where operations were not documented. When entries resumed after these gaps, they provided no acknowledgement that time had passed undocumented. They simply continued with the same routine notations as if nothing had been missed. One particularly long gap occurred in July 1985. The last entry was dated July 18th at 1400, marking the end of Shift A. The next entry was dated July 23rd at 0600, beginning Shift A again. 5 days unaccounted for. No explanation provided. We flagged this in our documentation. Significant gap in chronological record. No indication of facility closure, maintenance shutdown, or operational suspension. Records resume without comment. The entries from late 1985 began including references to interior monitoring. This was distinct from the external monitoring that had been mentioned previously. Interior monitoring was noted less frequently, approximately once per week, and always appeared during overnight hours when shift documentation was minimal. EO21 Interior monitoring completed. All stations confirm operational status. No anomalies detected. No context for what interior monitoring entailed. The logs already documented equipment checks and system verifications multiple times per shift. What additional monitoring was being performed inside the facility, and why did it occur primarily overnight? In December 1985, we encountered an entry that made us reconsider our entire approach to these documents. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, clear, temperature 6 degrees, wind light from east. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 88% capacity. 645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 7:30. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 7:50. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. External monitoring confirmed. 0920. Incident logged. See supplementary report. 945. Resumed normal operations. All systems nominal. 1200. Scheduled transmission at 12:15. Equipment prepared. 12:20. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 8 minutes. All protocols followed. 1400. End of shift. Log transferred to Shift B 1400. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions noted as unchanged from previous shift. Perimeter sensors show no activity during daylight hours. Generator fuel at 88% capacity. 4:45. Afternoon system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 15:30. External monitoring confirmed. 16:45. Scheduled transmission at 1700. Equipment prepared. 17:05. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 18:15. No anomalies detected during evening sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. 1920. Additional monitoring requested. Interior stations verified. 2015. Interior monitoring completed. All systems nominal. 0200. End of shift. Log transferred to Shift A. The timestamp was wrong. Shift B had begun at 1400 and ended at 0200, a full 12 hours later as expected. But the date had not changed. Both shifts occurred on December 12, 1985. Shift A ran from 600 to 1400. Shift B ran from 1400 to 200. But the log entry for Shift B beginning did not advance the date to December 13th when it crossed midnight. We checked the following entry. December 13th, 0600. Shift A commenced normally, but this created a timeline problem. If Shift B ended at 0200 on December 12th, which should have been 0200 on December 13th, and Shift A began at 0600 on December 13th, there were only 4 hours between shifts, not the expected 6 hours that would follow a shift ending at 200. One of our colleagues suggested this was simply a transcription error. Someone had forgotten to flip the date when the shift crossed midnight. This happened in handwritten logs occasionally, though these were typed documents that presumably had been reviewed and verified before archiving. But what concerned us more was that this was not the only instance. We went back through the logs and found several other examples where timestamps did not align properly with dates. In some cases, a shift that should have lasted 12 hours according to its start and end times was documented as occurring entirely within a single calendar day, despite clearly crossing midnight. In other cases, the reverse occurred. Shifts that should have been contained within one day were split across 2 dates with unexplained time gaps. We began creating a timeline, attempting to reconstruct the actual sequence of operations at Station 12 based on the logs. What we found was incoherent. If we followed the timestamp strictly, shifts overlapped. Personnel would have needed to be working simultaneously on different tasks in different parts of the facility. If we followed the dates strictly and ignored timestamps, entire shifts disappeared and operational gaps appeared that were not otherwise documented. The logs were internally inconsistent, and this inconsistency became more pronounced the further we progressed through 1985 and into 1986. January 1986 introduced a new format. Some entries began including numerical codes alongside the standard text. ACO 600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, overcast. Temperature, 90 Suaro. Wind, moderate from west. Perimeter. Sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 85% capacity. Code 4J confirmed. Z0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. Status green. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 0750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. Code 4J maintained. The codes appeared sporadically, sometimes multiple times in a single shift, sometimes not for days. They seemed to indicate status or classification, but without a reference key, we could not determine their meaning. We logged every instance, creating a separate database of codes and their contexts, hoping a pattern would emerge. Certain codes appeared more frequently than others. Code 4J appeared dozens of times between January and April 1986. Status green was common. Status yellow appeared occasionally. Status red appeared only once, in March 1986, during an entry that otherwise described completely routine operations. So 600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, partly cloudy, temperature 4 degrees, wind light from south. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 91% capacity. Status, red code 4J suspended, 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. Status yellow. Code 4J resuming. 7:30, scheduled transmission at 7:45, equipment prepared, SO 750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes, all protocols followed. Status green, code 4J confirmed. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. The facility apparently transitioned through 3 different status levels within 2 hours during a shift that was otherwise completely unremarkable. No incidents were logged. No equipment malfunctions. No unusual activity. Just a color-coded status that changed for reasons not explained in the documentation. By mid-1986, approximately 1/3 of entries included these codes. They had become a standard part of the log format, documented as routinely as weather conditions and system checks. And like those routine elements, they were recorded without context or explanation. In June 1986, we found the first entry that explicitly acknowledged the existence of other facilities. Until this point, Station 12's logs had operated in complete isolation. No references to coordination with other installations, no mentions of organizational hierarchy, no indication that the facility was part of any larger network. The June 17th entry changed this. 0600, shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, rain, temperature 15 degrees C, wind moderate from southeast. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 87% capacity. 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 7:30. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. Coordination with Station 7 confirmed. 7:50. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. Station 7 acknowledgement received. 0815. No anomalies detected during morning sweep. Standard monitoring protocols maintained. External sensors functioning normally. Internal climate control stable. Station 7. The first indication that other numbered stations existed. We immediately searched the archives for any reference to Station 7 or any other numbered facilities. We found nothing. No logs, no documentation, no administrative records. If Station 7 existed, its archives had not been transferred to our facility, or they had been stored separately under different classification. Over the following months, several other station numbers appeared in the logs. Station 3, Station 9, Station 14. Always in the context of coordination, acknowledgement, or data exchange. Never with location information, never with operational details about these other facilities. The references were infrequent, perhaps once every few weeks. But they established that Station 12 was not operating independently. It was part of a network, a system of facilities that apparently communicated with each other and followed similar protocols. This raised questions we could not answer. If multiple stations existed, where was the central coordinating authority? What organization operated these facilities? What were they monitoring and why? The logs provided no answers. In August 1986, we encountered entries that included what appeared to be measurement data. 0600, shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, clear. Temperature 20 degrees C, wind negligible. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 89% capacity. 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 0750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. Radio MV. Morning readings. Sector 1, 0.47. Sector 2, 0.51. Sector 3, 0.49. Sector 4, 0.52. Sector 5, 0.48. Sector 6, 0.50. Sector 7, offline. Sector 8, 0.49. All readings within expected parameters. The measurements had no units, no indication of what was being measured. The numbers were always decimal values between 0 and 1, clustering around 0.5. They appeared daily from August 1986 onward, always following the morning system check, always described as within expected parameters, regardless of variation. Sector 7, noted as offline since November 1983, remained offline. No other sectors showed malfunctions or anomalies. The readings continued with remarkable consistency, varying only by hundredths of a decimal point from day to day. What concerned us was the implication. If these were sensor readings, what were the sensors detecting? Radiation levels? Seismic activity? Atmospheric pressure? The values were too stable for most environmental measurements, too narrow in range. They suggested something being measured with precision, something that remained remarkably constant over time. We consulted with specialists outside our team, carefully avoiding any details that might breach archival confidentiality. We described hypothetical measurement scenarios and asked what types of readings might produce such consistent decimal values. The responses were varied and inconclusive. Ambient radiation in controlled environments, frequency stability in oscillating systems, background noise levels in acoustic monitoring. None of these explanations felt adequate. Station 12 had never described itself as a radiation monitoring facility, seismic station, or acoustic installation. It referred to radio equipment, sensors, and monitoring protocols, but never specified what was being monitored. September 1986 introduced longer entries. The logs began including more detailed descriptions of routine procedures, as if the authors felt the need to document more thoroughly. 600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions: partly cloudy, temperature 18 degrees, wind light from west. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 86% capacity. Zo 645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified against standard calibration parameters. Signal propagation within normal range. Secondary backup operational and synchronized. All monitoring stations responding normally. Response times verified against baseline values. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. Transmission protocols reviewed and confirmed. Encryption systems verified operational. 750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. Received confirmation from Station 9. Data integrity verified on both ends. Zo 815. Morning readings: Sector 1, 0.47, Sector 2, 0.51, Sector 3, 0.49, Sector 4, 0.52, Sector 5, 0.48, Sector 6, 0.50, Sector 7, offline, Sector 8, 0.49, all readings within expected parameters. No significant deviation from baseline values established in previous monitoring period. The increased detail did not actually provide more useful information. The additional language clarified that signals were being propagated, encryption was being used, and baselines were being established. But the fundamental questions remained unanswered. What signals? What data was being encrypted? What baselines? This pattern continued through late 1986 and into 1987. Longer entries with more technical language that somehow conveyed less actual information. The logs had become performance documents, demonstrations of proper procedure and protocol compliance, without revealing what those procedures and protocols were meant to accomplish. In March 1987, we found an entry that made us reconsider the timeline of Station 12's operations. 0600, shift commenced, all systems nominal. Weather conditions: overcast, temperature 3 degrees Celsius, wind moderate from north. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 88% capacity. Station operational, day 1, 461. The notation appeared at the end of the standard header. Day 1 and 461. We calculated backward from March 1987. 4 years and 1 day, accounting for a leap year. That would place the beginning of operations in March 1983, consistent with the first log entry we had found. Except the notation suggested this was not a calendar count, but an operational count. Day 1461 of station operations, which implied Station 12 had been operational since before the first log entry we possessed. We went back to the beginning of the logs and examined the March 3rd, 1983 entry more carefully. It did not indicate this was the facility's first day of operations. It was simply the first entry in this particular set of logs. There was no commissioning ceremony, no initialization procedures, no setup documentation. Station 12 began the logs already operational, already established in its routines. If day 1, 461 was accurate, then Station 12 had become operational sometime in March 1983. And the logs we possessed documented operations from that point forward. But where were the earlier logs? Where was the documentation from the facility's establishment, its construction, its initial testing and calibration? We searched the archives more thoroughly. We examined every box from the same transfer batch, looking for earlier logs or related documentation. We found nothing. Station 12's history began with a routine shift report and a facility already in operation. The operational day count appeared sporadically in subsequent entries, usually during months when the logs included other unusual notations or codes. Day 1502, Day 1589, Day 1947. Always consistent with a count that began in early March 1983. Always confirming that Station 12 had been operational for longer than our logs documented. In July 1987, the logs began including references to extended monitoring periods. These were distinct from the regular monitoring protocols documented throughout each shift. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, clear, temperature 24 degrees, wind negligible. Perimeter sensors show no activity overnight. Generator fuel at 90% capacity. 6:45. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 30. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 0750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 0815. Morning readings. Sector 1, 0.47. Sector 2, 0.51. Sector 3, 0.49. Sector 4, 0.52. Sector 5, 0.48. Sector 6, 0.50. Sector 7, offline. Sector 8, 0.49. All readings within expected parameters. 0900. Extended monitoring period initiated. Duration 6 hours. All personnel to maintain readiness protocols. 1500. Extended monitoring period concluded. No anomalies detected. Standard operations resumed. Extended monitoring periods lasted anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. They occurred irregularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes not for months. The logs provided no indication of what triggered these periods or what they entailed. Personnel were instructed to maintain readiness protocols, but those protocols were never described. During extended monitoring periods, the logs contained no other entries. 6-hour gaps in otherwise detailed documentation. Whatever happened during these periods was not recorded in the operational logs or was recorded elsewhere in documents we did not have access to. By late 1987, extended monitoring periods were occurring approximately twice per month. The logs had developed a predictable rhythm, routine operations interrupted by these documented but unexplained periods of heightened activity, followed by resumption of normal routines with no acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. In November 1987, we encountered a series of entries that disrupted even the minimal pattern we had identified. For 3 consecutive days, the logs recorded operations that should have been impossible given the facility's established schedule. November 15, 1987, showed complete entries for Shift A, 0600, 1800, and Shift B, 1800, 600. Nothing unusual. November 16th showed complete entries for both shifts. November 17th showed the same. But when we examined the entries in detail, we realized all 3 days described identical activities. The system checks performed at 6:45 on all 3 days reported the same equipment status in the same language. The scheduled transmissions at 0750 all lasted exactly 11 minutes. The morning readings for all 8 sectors were identical across all 3 days. Even the weather conditions matched. Clear, temperature 99 degrees, wind light from east. 1 day of identical conditions was unremarkable. 2 days was unusual but possible. 3 consecutive days with identical weather, identical sensor readings, identical transmission times, identical everything suggested the entries were not independent observations, but copies, repetitions. We considered that someone might have mistakenly duplicated entries while transcribing the logs, but these were typed documents, and the typewriter impressions on the paper varied slightly between the 3 days, suggesting they had been produced separately, not photocopied. The alternative explanation was more troubling. Station 12 had experienced 3 consecutive days of absolutely identical conditions and operations. Same weather, same measurements, same activities, same timing. A level of consistency that seemed to defy probability. The pattern did not repeat immediately, but over the following months, we found several other instances of consecutive days with near-identical or completely identical entries. Sometimes 2 days. Once, in March 1988, 4 consecutive days. We flagged these in our documentation as potential transcription anomalies, but none of us were fully convinced that explanation was adequate. The logs from 1988 became increasingly difficult to process, not because of their content, which remained largely routine, but because of their format. The typewriter font began to vary. Some entries appeared to have been produced on different machines, with different character spacing and alignment. Some pages had typewriter impressions that suggested significant force, as if someone had been pressing the keys harder than necessary. Other pages had such faint impressions that the text was barely readable. We consulted with document preservation specialists. They confirmed that the paper was consistent with the stated time period and that the physical deterioration was normal for documents of this age stored in suboptimal conditions. But they could not explain the variation in typing quality. One specialist suggested that different personnel might have been maintaining the logs, each using their preferred technique or equipment. This was reasonable, but the logs had never indicated any personnel changes. No shift rotations, no new assignments, no acknowledgement that different individuals were producing these documents. The entries from mid-1988 began including references to verification procedures. These were distinct from system checks and monitoring protocols. ZO 600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions, rain, temperature 14 degrees, wind moderate from southeast. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 87% capacity. ZO 645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment, functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 0750. Transmission completed successfully. Duration 11 minutes. All protocols followed. 0815. Morning readings, Sector 1, 0.47. Sector 2, 0.51. Sector 3, 0.49. Sector 4, 0.52. Sector 5, 0.48. Sector 6, 0.50. Sector 7, offline. Sector 8, 0.49. All readings within expected parameters. 0900. Verification procedures initiated. Internal cross-checks completed. External confirmation requested. 1045. Verification procedures completed. All systems confirm operational integrity. No discrepancies detected. Verification procedures occurred several times per week, always during morning or early afternoon hours, always resulting in confirmation that systems were operating correctly, never explaining what was being verified or why verification was necessary. The language suggested that Station 12 was checking itself, confirming its own operations against some external standard or internal consistency measure. But the logs provided no indication of what that standard was. Or what would happen if verification procedures failed? In September 1988, we found the first entry that acknowledged potential problems. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions: partly cloudy, temperature 17 to 6, wind light from west. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 85% capacity. 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 7:45. Equipment prepared. 7:50. Transmission attempted. Duration 11 minutes. Protocols followed. Confirmation not received. 8:20. Transmission reattempted. Duration 11 minutes. Protocols followed. Confirmation received from Station 3. 0845. Morning readings. Sector 1, 0.47. Sector 2, 0.51. Sector 3, 0.49. Sector 4, 0.52. Sector 5, 0.48. Sector 6, 0.50. Sector 7, offline. Sector 8, 0.49. All readings within expected parameters. 0900, incident logged. See supplementary report. 0945, resumed normal operations. All systems nominal. The transmission had failed to receive confirmation. This was the first documented instance of any communication issue at Station 12. The problem was resolved within 30 minutes by reattempting the transmission, and operations continued normally. But as with previous incidents, there was no supplementary report. The problem was noted, addressed, and then never mentioned again. Over the following months, transmission failures became more common, not frequent, but regular. Perhaps once every 2 weeks, a scheduled transmission would fail to receive confirmation and require reattemption. Sometimes the reattempt succeeded immediately. Sometimes it required multiple attempts. The logs documented these failures with the same clinical detachment as they documented successful transmissions. In December 1988, we encountered an entry that suggested transmission failures were not the only issue. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions: snow, temperature 7 Ixania, wind strong from north. Perimeter sensors show standard overnight activity. Generator fuel at 83% capacity. 0645. Morning system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified with noted deviation. Correction applied. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally with noted anomaly in Station 4 response time. Issue logged for investigation. 0730. Scheduled transmission at 0745. Equipment prepared. 750. Transmission attempted. Duration 11 minutes. Protocols followed. Confirmation not received. 0820. Transmission reattempted. Duration 11 minutes. Protocols followed. Confirmation not received. 850. Transmission reattempted. Duration 11 minutes. Protocols followed. Confirmation received from Station 14. 0920. Morning readings. Sector 1, 0.47. Sector 2, 0.51. Sector 3, 0.49. Sector 4, 0.52. Sector 5, 0.48. Sector 6, 0.50. Sector 7, offline. Sector 8, 0.49. All readings within expected parameters. 1000. Verification procedures initiated. Internal cross-checks completed. External confirmation requested. 1145. Verification procedures in progress. Awaiting external confirmation. 1300. Verification procedures in progress. External confirmation not received. Internal verification only. 1400. End of shift. Log transferred to Shift B. Verification procedures ongoing. The shift had ended with verification procedures still in progress. This had never been documented before. Either verification procedures always completed before shift end, or their status across shift transitions had not been logged. Now we were seeing acknowledgement that some processes extended beyond individual shifts. The Shift B entry for December 14th, 1988. 1400. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather conditions: Snow, temperature 7 degrees. Wind strong from north. Perimeter sensors show no activity during previous shift. Generator fuel at 83% capacity. Verification procedures ongoing from previous shift. 14:45. Afternoon system check completed. Radio equipment functional. Primary antenna alignment verified. Secondary backup operational. All monitoring stations responding normally. Station 4 response time anomaly persists. 15:30. Verification procedures completed. External confirmation not received. Internal verification confirms operational integrity. Proceeding with standard operations. The verification had failed to receive external confirmation. Station 12 had verified itself internally but could not obtain external validation. Operations continued regardless. This pattern repeated several times over the following weeks. Verification procedures that could not be externally confirmed. Transmission attempts that required multiple reattempts. Equipment anomalies that persisted across multiple shifts. The logs were documenting deterioration, subtle but consistent, in Station 12's operations and its connection to whatever network it was part of. January 1989 marked a significant change in the logs. The entries became shorter, less detailed, reverting to a format similar to the earliest logs from 1983. 0600. Shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather, clear, 3 degrees. Generator at 86%, 0645. System check complete. All equipment functional. 750. Transmission complete. 11 minutes. 0:05. Readings normal. All sectors within parameters. 1400. End of shift. The clinical detail that had accumulated over years was suddenly absent. No mentions of specific protocols. No references to coordination with other stations. No verification procedures. Just bare acknowledgement that operations continued. We considered several explanations. Perhaps personnel changes had resulted in less thorough documentation. Perhaps new administrative directives had mandated briefer reporting. Perhaps the facility was reducing its documentation requirements for some operational reason. But the timing was notable. The logs became abbreviated immediately after several months of increasing operational anomalies. It suggested that someone had decided to document less, not more, at a time when more documentation would have been appropriate. The abbreviated format continued through early 1989. Then, in April, we found entries that contradicted the established timeline. April 3rd, 1989, 0600, shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather, partly cloudy, 8 degrees. Generator at 89%. Station operational, day 2223, calculated. Day 2223 from March 1983 would be approximately April 1989. The operational day count was consistent. But the next entry with a day count was from 2 weeks later. April 17th, 1989, 0600, shift commenced. All systems nominal. Weather, clear, 12 degrees. Generator at 87%. Station operational, day 2223. The same day count. 2 weeks had passed in calendar time, but the operational day count had not advanced. Either the notation was an error, or Station 12 had stopped counting operational days for some reason. Or, more troubling, Station 12's internal chronology had become disconnected from external chronology. We found several more instances of this over the following months. Operational day counts that repeated. Day counts that appeared out of sequence. Periods where day counts were not included at all, followed by their reappearance with values that did not account for the intervening time. By mid-1989, we could no longer construct a coherent operational timeline for Station 12. The logs documented activities, but those activities could not be reliably placed in temporal sequence. In August 1989, we found entries that suggested Station 12's isolation was increasing. 0600, shift commenced, all systems nominal. Weather, clear, 20 Varnick C, generator at 88%. 0645, system check complete, all equipment functional. 0750, transmission attempted, no, confirmation received. 0820, transmission reattempted, no confirmation received. 0850, transmission reattempted, no confirmation received. 01820, transmission protocol suspended, will reattempt next scheduled interval. The facility had given up trying to establish communication. This was new. Previously, transmission attempts had continued until confirmation was received. Now Station 12 was acknowledging that communication might not be possible, and proceeding anyway. Over the following weeks, more scheduled transmissions failed to receive confirmation. The logs documented attempts, failures, and eventual suspension of attempts. But the routine operations continued. System checks, sensor readings, equipment maintenance. Everything proceeded as if communication with other facilities was optional rather than essential. In October 1989, we encountered entries that departed significantly from any previous format. October 12, 1989. Operations continue. All measurements within expected parameters. External coordination suspended pending restoration of communication protocols. Internal verification confirms operational integrity. Station maintains readiness for re-establishment of network contact. No shift designation, no timestamp beyond the date. No specific activities documented, just a general statement that operations continued and communication remained disrupted. This format persisted for several weeks. Daily entries that confirmed Station 12 was operational without documenting what that operation entailed. Then, November 7th, 1989. Station 12 operational, awaiting instructions. That was the entire entry. 7 words. No details, no measurements, no status updates. Just confirmation of operational status and a statement that the facility was waiting for guidance that apparently was not arriving. The November 8th entry was identical. November 9th was identical. This continued for 9 consecutive days, the same 7 words repeated with only the date changing. On November 16th, 1989, the entry changed. Station 12 operational. Continuing autonomous protocols. Autonomous protocols had never been mentioned before. The logs had documented routine protocols, monitoring protocols, transmission protocols, but never autonomous protocols. The language suggested Station 12 had transitioned to a mode of operation that did not require external coordination or instruction. December 1989 consisted almost entirely of entries confirming operational status and continuation of autonomous protocols. The only variation came on December 23rd. Station 12 operational. Continuing autonomous protocols. Verification procedures confirm integrity of local operations. External network status remains unknown. Station 12 had lost contact with the network of facilities it was supposedly part of. Or the network had ceased operations. Or the network had never existed in the way the logs suggested. The facility acknowledged this uncertainty, but continued operating, regardless. The final entry in the logs was dated January 11, 1990. Station 12 operational. Autonomous protocols maintained. All systems functional. Sensor readings within established parameters. Generator fuel adequate. External monitoring continues. Internal monitoring continues. Operations will continue pending further instructions or until operational parameters indicate cessation is required. Then, nothing. The logs ended. No explanation. No shutdown sequence. No documentation of facility closure. Station 12 simply stopped recording its operations. We searched the archives exhaustively for any continuation of these logs. We checked for documents dated after January 1990 that might reference Station 12. We cross-referenced personnel records, equipment inventories, and administrative files from the relevant period. We found nothing. according to every official record we could access, Station 12 did not exist. There was no facility by that designation, no monitoring station, no radio installation, no research facility. The numbered station system the logs described, Station 3, Station 7, Station 9, Station 14, none of them appeared in any documentation. We expanded our search to regional administrative databases. We consulted with archival facilities in adjacent districts. We reviewed infrastructure surveys and technical facility registries from the 1980s. Nothing matched. One of our colleagues suggested these might be logs from a classified facility whose existence was not acknowledged in public records. This was plausible. Certain types of installations, particularly those related to communications, monitoring, or defense infrastructure, operated without appearing in civilian administrative documentation. But even classified facilities generated some paper trail. Budget allocations, even if coded. Personnel assignments, even if names were redacted. Equipment procurement records. Something. Station 12 had left only these logs, apparently archived by mistake or deliberate inclusion in a collection of mundane technical documentation where they would not attract attention. We submitted our findings to the archive director with a request for guidance on how to proceed. The logs clearly documented something, but without verifiable provenance or supporting documentation. Their historical value was questionable. They could be authentic records from an undocumented facility. They could be training exercises. They could be elaborate fabrications. The director's response was administrative and predictable. Continue standard digitization procedures. Flag the documents as unverified provenance. Include detailed notes about attempts to cross-reference and authenticate. Do not speculate about content or purpose. Complete the processing and move to the next collection. We did as instructed. The logs were scanned, indexed, and stored in the digital archive, with extensive notation that the facility and its operations could not be verified through other sources. The physical documents were returned to Box 847J and placed back in the climate-controlled storage area. That should have been the end of our involvement with Station 12. But 3 weeks after completing the digitization, we received a communication from an external research institution. They had accessed our digital archive and found references to Station 12. They were interested in the logs and requested copies for research purposes related to communications infrastructure during the transition period. We prepared the requested materials and included our authentication notes. The researchers acknowledged receipt and indicated they would investigate whether Station 12 corresponded to any installations their organization had records of. They contacted us again 2 months later. They had found no matching facilities in their databases. However, they had identified references to a Network 12 in budget documents from the mid-1980s. The budget line existed for approximately 6 years, then was discontinued. No explanation was provided for what Network 12 was or why funding ceased. Network 12, not Station 12. But the numerical correspondence was notable. The researchers requested any additional materials we might have related to numbered facilities or networks from the relevant period. We searched again and found nothing. Box 847J contained only the Station 12 logs. No other numbered stations. No network documentation. The researchers indicated they would continue investigating and would inform us if they found anything relevant. We have not heard from them since. That was 8 months ago. Last week, we began processing Box 891M from the same archival transfer that included Box 847J. The box was labeled Equipment Inventories, 1985-1992. Routine documentation of technical equipment distributed to various facilities during the late transition period. Near the bottom of the box, we found a 2-page memorandum dated March 1990. It was addressed to Regional Coordinator, Network Operations, and concerned the disposition of equipment from facilities that had been decommissioned or consolidated. Most of the memorandum listed facility codes and equipment types, standard administrative language about retrieving assets, conducting final inspections, and closing out property records. The final paragraph read, "Equipment retrieval from Station 12 could not be completed as facility location was not confirmed through available documentation. Station was not accessible at coordinates provided in original commissioning records. Network operations indicate Station 12 ceased reporting January 1990 and is presumed closed. Recommend classification as administrative loss. All associated records should be consolidated and archived pending future review." The memorandum was signed, but the signature was illegible. No organizational identifier was included. The document had been filed with routine equipment inventories, apparently considered mundane enough not to warrant special handling. We have logged this document and cross-referenced it with the Station 12 logs. We have submitted an updated report to the archive director, noting that we now have secondary documentation confirming Station 12 existed, at least within some administrative framework, but that its location was uncertain even to the organization that operated it. The director's response was brief. Note the connection in the database. Continue processing remaining materials. Box 891M contained approximately 300 pages of equipment inventories. We are currently working through them. Most document unremarkable transfers and disposals of standard technical equipment. But we have started finding other references. Brief notations. Equipment allocated to network facilities. Budget codes that include net prefixes followed by numbers. None of these references provide enough information to determine what the network was or what its facilities did. We have 47 boxes remaining from this archival transfer. Standard procedure is to process them in sequence. We are currently on box 894P. We do not know if we will find more logs, more facilities, more documentation of a network that officially never existed. The work continues. We scan documents, we enter metadata, we follow protocols, and we note the anomalies when they appear, recording them in our database without speculation, without interpretation, just documentation that certain things were written down and archived. Even if we cannot verify what they described or whether those descriptions corresponded to reality. Station 12 stopped reporting in January 1990. Its logs ended with confirmation that operations would continue pending further instructions. Those instructions apparently never arrived. The facility was classified as an administrative loss. Its equipment was never retrieved. Its location was never confirmed. And somewhere in archives we have not yet processed, or in facilities we have no access to, there might be more logs, more stations, more documentation of operations that continued in isolation, following protocols no one remembered establishing, waiting for coordination that never resumed. We continue our work. We maintain strict procedures. And when we find something that should not exist, we document it carefully and move to the next box. That is our job. That is what we do.